portrait sits in a velvet case, its brass clasp softened by hands that learned long ago to open it without thinking. The silk lining has browned at the folds, where the hinge asks for obedience. The oval frame has a thin ring of verdigris, where metal met breath, again and again. If you lift the lid and let the afternoon lean in, the two sisters appear with the slow authority of the 1860s, collars high, hair parted with the accuracy of a ruler, chins held as if taught to bear the weight of their names. Their dresses are dark in the way mourning clothes are dark, even when no one has said the word aloud. A painted backdrop offers drapery, and a column, and a clearing no one has stepped into. The elder sits, one hand on her lap, the other resting on the velvet arm of a chair the studio owned the way a minister owns a pulpit. The younger stands beside her, a little forward, a little behind, a little uncertain, as if the floor might give way. At first glance, it is ordinary for its time. The photographer has done what photographers then were paid to do, arrange a family into a notion of itself and fix that notion in silver. But if you stay, if you let the light find the surface again, and your eyes agree to work as slowly as collodion dries, you notice the thing that cannot be unseen. It is in the eyes. The elder's gaze has depth. A small square of window light sits inside each pupil like a promise kept. The younger's eyes gleam differently. Their blacks are too complete, the whites are too clean, there is no catchlight. The irises fail to hold the little squares of the studio windows that insist on appearing in every other dark surface in the frame. The lashes are heavier than lashes ought to be, the way paint grows brave when asked to imitate softness. The pupils are placed with care, yes, but not with the care life gives, more like the care of a hand that believes a circle can persuade the world to be round. Once you see it, you trace it everywhere. The younger's left eye looks a fraction too high, the right one a whisper too low. The brows carry a question the mouth does not. The skin around those eyes has been coaxed with gum and knife, smoothed into a quiet that does not belong to breath. The elder's eyes, meanwhile, do too much. They have two bright points in each, not one, and the second point is wrong. It is not a window, not a lamp. It is a small white shape like a folded cloth. If you lean closer, you can convince yourself that it is a reflection of the thing just out of frame and just out of language. The kerchief the mother clutched and could not be convinced to set down, even for the minute the exposure demanded stillness. The kerchief, or a ribbon, or the edge of a cap not on a head. You can tell yourself it's trickery, a trick of light. The picture does not mind your excuses. It has been holding its truth in an oval for more than a century. It can wait for you. The year on the back, written in a penciled hand that learned its letters before the war and kept its habit after, is 1867. The town is the kind of town the railroad taught to exist. Warehouses with ambitions, houses with corners that believe weather is a suggestion. The photographer is Mr. Bellamy, lately of Boston, formerly of anywhere work could be persuaded to appear. He writes his name in a neat copper plate below the oval and adds photographic rooms, Main Street, and draws two tiny lines that pretend to be laurel. Inside his darkroom, bottles line a shelf like sermons: ether, alcohol, collodion, silver nitrate, developer, fixer. The floor remembers every portrait as a smell. The girls are Ada and Liddy Stone. Ada is 12, and grave in the way children become when they have listened at doors. Liddy is 9, and is trying, with all the good will in her body, to be what everyone has asked of her. Their father Edwin counts freight at the depot and speaks to the ledger the way a man speaks to weather, respectfully, and with the knowledge that he is not negotiating with an equal. Their mother, Miriam, keeps a house that carries an aftertaste of lye when it is clean and of onion when it is hopeful. There was a baby once between the girls, a boy that arrived and left in spring. There is a piece of ribbon in a box to prove it, and there is a silence around certain dates that even strangers sense if they stay for tea. The thing that made 1867 cruel for the Stones was not war. It had already done its arithmetic on other families, but fever. It came late that summer, skipping house to house the way a sparrow tries fences, and sat on Liddy's chest like a guest who had been invited by no one and intended to stay. The cough was small at first, then not. Ada woke to the sound of it and felt her own ribs tighten in sympathy. The doctor, Cyrus Hale, who had learned to grow a decent mustache to look older than his years, pressed a hand to a forehead, then a spoon to a tongue, then an ear to a chest, and said the sort of sentence towns learn to hate. We must wait. Waiting is an occupation for the well. There is no way to tell you the day without saying what the day kept. Liddy's fever broke and took too much of her with it. She did not die. Not that day. But she turned toward leaving. She grew light, the way children do when their body decides to keep less of the world. She slept long hours, then woke with the sudden brightness of someone checking to see if the room still loves her. Miriam learned to wet a cloth and let it sit on a forehead until the cloth forgot it had ever been dry. Ada learned which floorboard apologized when you stepped on it and which kept its own counsel. Edwin learned to count and then to stop counting. When the fever left, Liddy finally took its hat and went out the door without closing it. The house found quiet that did not feel like peace. Miriam ironed Ada's dress with more pressure than necessary and said, "We will go to Mr. Bellamy. We will have our likenesses made." Edwin began to object, then stopped, then nodded. He could carry a crate up a gangplank without breaking a sweat, but there are moments a photograph weighs more than freight. Bellamy's rooms are warm. Ether does that to air. The assistant, thin, nimble, hair that cannot decide which direction a young man should be choosing, polishes a lens with the reverence of a person who understands the difference between glass and vision. Bellamy greets families as if the appointment is a ceremony he has trained to conduct with dignity. He gestures to the chair. He adjusts the headrest, an iron thing shaped like mercy and deceit, meant to keep people from drifting while the minute becomes permanent. Miriam keeps Liddy close, her palm a small grace at the back of the neck. Liddy is strong enough to stand, if someone else's hand agrees not to let the floor be mean. Ada sits, because she can be trusted to do so. Bellamy asks for a second to set the plate. He pours collodion like a priest pours oil, evenly, as if any unevenness would be a breach of faith. He offers the usual instructions that make sitters obedient and nervous. Eyes to me. Chin left. Good. Hold, hold, if you please. The first plate takes them without the flash, a long stare pressed into light. Liddy lasts the minute and then becomes tired in a way that does not admit argument. Miriam kneels with her and says quietly, "We could wait," which is a sentence that speaks to more than the room. Edwin's jaw works. He watches the doorway, the way men look for weather that might change its mind. He says, "No. Now," which is not a command so much as a confession. He cannot guarantee any later. Bellamy has done this before, not often, enough to recognize sorrow when it brings its own chair. The second plate is prepared. The room must be coaxed into stillness again. Liddy leans more into Ada. Ada's spine does not complain. The assistant lifts the headrest a fraction. Bellamy watches the small things, the tremor of an eyelid, the lost patience of a child's mouth. He moves quickly to the camera and, in the breath before the cap comes off, makes a decision. He will neither defend nor forget. He will keep the eyes open. Afterward, in the dark room that glows like a held breath, Bellamy opens the lens's harvest to light again, to developer and water and fixer, the alchemy that lets silver admit what it has seen. The image blooms the way bruises do, first faint, then confession. He sees what he dreaded. In the second plate, Liddy's lids have surrendered to their own gravity. Her lashes lie like reeds across a quiet lake. He could print that truth and hand it to the family and collect his coin and go home to a supper that would taste of collodion. He could. He has done so before. He also knows what nursemaids and mothers taught him accidentally in his first months at this trade, that sometimes the work is mercy. He sets the plate on the retoucher's stand. He lays out the tools of the small, deliberate lie: fine sable brush, India ink, a point of charcoal, a breath of gum, a lancet so slender it looks apologetic. He leans until the plate's world looks as big as the room he stands in. He breathes, steadies his hand on the metal rim, and paints circles. The trick is not the circle itself. Any child can put a dark coin in the middle of an iris. The trick is to place them where eyes would be if wishing were a map. He deepens the lower lids with a whisper of shadow, thins the lashes' heaviness into the suggestion of wakefulness, melts ink into silver until the two cannot be easily separated by any pair of hands that will open the case in the next century. He hates this part and loves it. He is making a thing the world calls beautiful out of a thing the world did not deserve to witness. He is lying with the honesty of service. He is also erasing something that ought to have been named. He will carry both convictions the rest of his life. When the cabinet card is dry and mounted, and the laurel lines are drawn small under his neat name, the family returns. Miriam's expression is one the town has learned to respect. Any woman making teeth do the job of a coin. Ada stands very still, hands folded in a way no child should have to learn. Edwin picks up the case. He opens it. He looks. He blinks once, slowly, like a man overtaken by rain that he recognizes as his own sweat. "There," he says, and in that single word lives gratitude and loss and the sort of relief that stings. They pay. Bellamy takes the coin the way a person takes the host, without his tongue interrupting. He wraps 2 additional prints in tissue because sometimes a man cannot afford to be generous and must try anyway. When the family leaves, the assistant asks the kind of question apprentices think mentors enjoy. "Sir," he says, "is it better or worse?" Bellamy answers with a thing that is not an answer. "It is what they needed," he says. Then he sets about washing the plate as if cleaning might redeem him. The portrait goes home to the Stones' parlor. It stands on the mantel and teaches the room how to treat its own air. Visitors admire it with the phrases people have practiced since the invention of families. A pair of beauties. How alike they are around the mouth. You can see your Miriam in the elder's eyes. No one mentions the younger's eyes. How smooth, how quiet, how constant. The eyes are what people call striking, when they don't know that the blow belongs to something other than paint. Time, that good and clumsy archivist, sets to work. Liddy does not get better. She does not get worse. She learns to walk a little and then to prefer laps. Ada reads near her, turning pages slowly as if the sound might startle a bird. Edwin lifts his daughter with one hand now as easily as he lifts a sack with the other. Miriam hums songs into Liddy's hair, not so much to soothe as to mark each small minute as lived and accounted for. The winter is sharp, the spring is generous, the summer is habit. The autumn decides to be brief. Liddy dies in October. She does it in her sleep, the same obedience that made the portrait possible. The house rearranges itself. The cradle that had been repurposed as a basket becomes a cradle again for flowers that will be allowed inside for one afternoon. The neighbors come in a line that modest houses treat as parades. The minister is steady enough for all of them. Ada stands by the mantel because the mantel knows how to hold still. After, when the casseroles return the room to its rightful temperature, the portrait remains. It is a mercy, and it is an indictment. Ada begins to talk to it the way one speaks to a grave, half report, half argument. She grows up in the presence of those eyes. She marries a man who looks people in the face because he was taught to. She tucks the case into a drawer when the house becomes smaller, then into a trunk when the world asks her family to move, then into a box when the trunk is too heavy for two. In 1911, Ada's daughter, Nora, a nurse with a spine that convinces injured men their pain has not scared her, opens the trunk because she needs something from the past that says staying is a skill. She finds the case, and the brass gives up easily. She looks, and her breath stalls. She leans to the window until the little squares of the modern world throw dares into two pairs of pupils. The elder's eyes reflect the rectangle of a new sash, cheerful as a geometry lesson. The younger's show nothing. Nora has seen death painted lively before, in wards where cheeks learn blush from rouge, in parlours where a good woman paled with grace and someone asked someone else to fetch a pot of tea, as if the kettle cared. She recognizes Bellamy's work without knowing his name. She writes on a slip of paper that she slides into the case under the velvet lip, Liddy. October 1867. She cannot bear to write anything that looks like the words the century taught people for leaving. Names will have to do. In 1950, a teacher named Mrs. Pratt tells her fifth form class about Victorian photographs, as if the Victorians were a stubborn relative one must admire and forgive in equal measure. She says the word post-mortem with a softness that makes it sound like something you'd buy for a shelf. A boy with the kind of curiosity that is always mistaken for mischief raises a hand and asks, "How do you know?" She answers with a list. Catchlights, lids, the leash of a headrest, the patience of a mouth. The boy goes home and looks at his great-aunt's album, not for the faces, but for the eyes. He starts seeing everything. In 1978, a librarian named Helen, who has learned to recognize the difference between trash and testimony at 20 paces, opens a donation box from an estate that smelled of damp, saved against hope. She finds the stone portrait. The case's clasp protests, then yields like an old friend who needed convincing. She spends the kind of minute only librarians and locksmiths believe is worth trading for air. She sees the eyes. She sees the pencil mark on the back, 1867, and the little slip, Liddy, October 1867. She writes an accession number in the corner of the mount with a pencil that respects paper's wish to be left alone. She places the case in a sleeve and makes a card for the file. Under description, she writes, 2 sisters, studio portrait, retouched eyes on younger child, likely post-mortem, catchlight missing. Under notes, she allows herself to stray. Older sister's pupils catch reflection of handkerchief held just out of frame. Mother likely present. The portrait goes into a small exhibition called Ordinary Families because titles must be given to grant money. It sits in a line of faces that have learned to introduce themselves in silence. Visitors shuffle with the weather. A young woman leans to read labels. A man in a cap tells his grandson that people used to hold still so long that sometimes they forgot to breathe. A widow stands in front of the sisters and puts her hand on her own heart, not because of what she sees, but because of what she recognizes. The labor of looking alive when someone you love has stopped. A girl with a red scarf bends so close that the guard clears his throat, gently. "Sorry," she whispers, and keeps bending. She has learned to search pictures for the thing that is stubborn. She finds it. She sees the paint where paint ought not to be. She sees the smoothness around lashes. She sees the elder's eyes reflecting more than one square, a window, yes, and the white of something softer. She says to the boy beside her, "Do you see it?" He squints and then goes still. "Oh," he says, and the syllable performs the work of a book. When the exhibit closes, Helen returns the portrait to its dark, which is a kind of kindness museums know. She writes an article in the Historical Society's pamphlet about retouching in the age of grief, and the town reads it the way towns read anything that mentions them, quickly, proudly, half regretting the education that comes with pride. She thanks Mr. Bellamy in print, though he is long past reading. She thanks the assistant too, in case he is the one who did the work. She writes the sentence she had not been allowed on the label. The eyes tell a truth the rest of the image won't. She goes home and waters her plants and leaves the porch light on, because even a librarian has faith in a late arrival now and then. In 2003, Ada's great-great-grandson finds the portrait again because his mother has died, and he is doing the winnowing that teaches you which objects are your new relatives. He brings the case to a kitchen that smells of coffee and detergent and a little of dust. He opens it, and the faces appear as if no time has passed between them and him. He knows none of the rules for seeing. He has learned a different century's tricks. Still, the eyes boss him into attention. "What's odd?" he asks his wife, and she leans and says the thing that makes two people temporarily smarter than either is alone. One of them is too seen, the other too seeing. He Googles Victorian painted eyes and falls into a river of strangers whose dead were rescued by ink. He feels less lonely. He learns that this is a practice people argue about with polite fury. He decides not to argue. He decides to treat the case and the faces like a bowl carried from table to table by hands that never drop it. If you hold the portrait now, in your hands, in your light, the eyes will teach you where to look in other rooms. You will start to notice how catchlights behave. You will learn the difference between a reflection squared by a window and a white dot wished into being by a careful man's brush. You will see headrests pretending not to exist in the blur behind collars. You will notice how children's mouths, when asked to be still, bargain with seconds and often win. You will begin to ask gentle questions of any face that refuses to gather any light. What were you asked to do? Who asked you? What did you keep for yourself anyway? And you will carry those questions out of the frame with you into evenings that need them. The story will not promise you justice. Liddy is gone in the only way gone can be. Ada's adulthood will fill with work that refuses to describe itself as grief. Miriam will learn to let people say past without correcting them to died, not because she believes in euphemism, but because she has learned which words make other people leave the room. Edwin will keep counting until counting becomes a way to sleep. Mr. Bellamy will open and close his rooms and then die of something so ordinary it will insult the bottle that taught him to take care. But the portrait promises you this, that looking is a form of keeping. That the small, deliberate lies love sometimes asks us to make, painted pupils, softened lids, can hold a kind of truth larger than their dishonesty. That a sister's eyes will always reflect the thing a mother cannot put down. That a century can be crossed not only by trains and telegraphs, but by two oval pools of dark that teach a stranger how to stay. If you close the case softly, as someone has shown you to do, and put it back where it lives, drawer, trunk, fireproof box, you will feel for a second the impulse the modern world gives people who find secret details, to put a red circle on it, to instruct the future exactly where to look. Resist it. The picture has been doing that work since 1867 without your pen. It has circles enough. The pupils, perfect. The locket, hidden beneath a bodice that no longer creaks. The oval of the frame, the wedding ring Miriam could not part with, even when washing floors. The laurel lines Bellamy drew under his name to remind himself the trade could be noble. Let the eyes teach. Let them be the quiet halo they were made to be. Walk back into your room. Notice how your windows make little squares in everything they touch. Pour water. Boil it because you want tea, not because someone is ill. Sit. And if your own eyes catch two small whites in their dark when the lamp finds them, your own reflection doubling back, you will understand what the sisters have been saying all along, what every good photograph that looks harmless and is not, has been repeating in a voice it learned from Silver. Look longer, ask kinder. The truth is in the eyes.